The Influencer's Edge is brought to you by the Rapid Sales Accelerator. If you're ready to skyrocket your sales by 30% or more in just 90 days, then you need to claim your free training right now. You'll learn 4 words that will compel your prospects to trust you like they were children within the first 3 to 5 minutes of any conversation across any platform in any medium. You'll learn how to give your prospects objection amnesia, to crush objections like, I need to talk to my spouse, or I need more time to think it over, or it's too expensive. If you'd like to claim your free training now, go to www.paulrossbook.com. Do it before your competition does it now. Welcome to the Influencer's Edge. This is the place where you come to get the latest breakthroughs, cutting-edge insights, tools, and techniques to leapfrog over the pack in sales, persuasion, and influence. Be sure you visit our website at www.theinfluencersedge.com. And while you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now sit back, tune in, and enjoy today's episode. All right, welcome back to the Influencer's Edge. This is a show where we color outside the lines, disconnect the dots, and think outside the box. And today's guest, I'm honored to have him on the show because he is one busy and one successful human being, Matt Haycox. So say hi to everybody, Matt.
Thank you very much for the beautiful intro. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And you have a lovely accent. Where are you from?
I'm from England, from Leeds in the north of England, but I've lived in Dubai for the last 4 years now. So I'm a COVID transplant over here.
I've been to England many times, all the time London, and I really like Canary Wharf, which is very posh, as the Brits like to say. All right, so let's dive right in. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is you're an incredibly resilient human being. We'll get into the biography briefly, but one of the themes that I like to deal with, in addition to people who are contrarians and don't believe in traditional wisdom, is resilience. So I really want to get into it. Well, we have to cover a little bit of your story and backstory to get to that. So let me do the bio really quickly. So Matt Haycox is a seasoned entrepreneur. I'm sorry, I have to make this really small and put on my reading glasses. My apologies. A seasoned entrepreneur and investor with over 25 years of experience in the business world. You provided close to 1 billion in funding. That's 1 billion pounds. That's a lot of cash. That's a lot of moolah to be spreading around. $1 billion in funding to UK businesses invested over 100 companies. My first question for you is where in the world, 2 questions. What is your discernment process? How do you discern whether a business is worth investing in? Because a lot of people have been taught, well, you just have to be positive and you have to be resilient. We'll talk about your resilience, and you have to be persistent. But no one talks about good decision making and discernment. So I would really like to dive in, since you have so much experience in dealing with making good decisions. What is your decision making process, and how did you develop the discernment that's necessary to do what you do?
Well, I think that's because I've made plenty of bad decisions. And I think, I mean, most things in life, you only really learn when things go wrong. And now hopefully you can learn as much as possible from things that go wrong for other people, as opposed to having it all go wrong for yourself. But I think nowhere is it more prevalent than in the lending business, because ultimately, you make a loan every time you make a loan to somebody, every time you make an investment, you're doing that expecting it to go right. If you weren't, you wouldn't do it in the first place. You're not making a loan thinking it's a hedged bet. So when it goes right and you get paid back, you can pat yourself on the back, but you don't really know. I guess you've never really learned anything. You made the loan, you got the money back, that's great. But only when it goes wrong do you actually learn anything. And I always say that money is very easy to lend and not so easy to collect. And it's only during that collection process when things start to go awry that you learn I guess that you learn how to not make the same lending mistakes next time around. So I've lost a lot of money for 25 years, which is why I've learned a few things about how to make it.
I think, it was Rockefeller who said, and this is the quote that's coming to mind as I listen to you speak, that's coming up in my curiosities. I think it was Rockefeller said they asked him the secret to his fortune. He said, I was wrong a lot more often than I was right, but I was wrong small and I was right big. I don't
Mhm.
know if that resonates with you or not.
Absolutely, and look, you could take that analogy or take that story off in many different directions. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's about being right once and being right big enough that that one time. You only need to be right once in a big way, and that's you set for life. Then the next job is just making sure that you don't fritter it all away.
All right, you said something that begs a larger question.
Go
You
for it.
said learn from your mistakes. Now, this is very interesting because I've heard this over and over. I've been to self-development seminars and wealth building seminars, and everyone says, well, you have to learn from your mistakes, but no one gives you a process for doing that. So I want to know, this really is where we get to the sweet spot. What is your process for learning from your mistakes?
I don't know if I have a specific process, but I tell you what the most important bit is. It's really having the humility to know that you were wrong and to accept that you were wrong, because far too often people want to make excuses and play the victim in it. And if you do that, then you're never going to learn anything. And I think the key lesson is to always take responsibility for the fact that it was your fault. And I like to say that I'm very good at making everything my fault, even if even if you think something maybe isn't your fault. So I don't know, for example, if something goes wrong with a member of staff in the business, and you could argue that I'm 7 parts removed from that member of staff, so how can that possibly have been my fault? Well, ultimately, I hired the person who hired that person who hired that person who hired that person. And look, I know it's a stretch, but I think it's important to go in with that mentality and really say, well, what have I done wrong? What have we done wrong? Because something has been done wrong, and unless we have the honesty and the humility to know that, then you're never going to fix anything. And I'm also, I guess, I'm an obsessive learner as well. So in a way, I'm probably perversely attracted to things going wrong because
That's
another
a
skill
quote.
set.
I'm going to tell my producer to make sure she puts that quote in. Matt believes that he is perversely attracted to things that go wrong. And again, I keep,
I'm a business self harmer.
I don't have water with me, so you can't make me laugh like that, Haycox. This is really, really cool because people say be super confident, be sure of yourself, but you're saying, no, 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 no. Have the humility to see that things have gone wrong and take responsibility. The question again, now this begs a larger question. How do you take responsibility without getting down on yourself, without feeling, oh, I'm never going to make it right? There's an emotion. Often you seem to be able to separate yourself from the you use the word blame, but apparently you can do it without beating on yourself. Am I getting that right? Or do you ever have moments where you have beat on yourself and thought, what a fuck up I am?
Listen, I think there's times when I kick myself for maybe making a bad decision when I know when my gut told me otherwise before, and I kind of found excuses not to go with it.
Got it.
But I think look, nine times out of ten, the reason I can be happy about it, if that's the right word. When it's not that I'm happy when things go wrong, it's that I'm more interested in the journey and the end goal than some of the pit stops along the way. And ultimately, I know that whatever mistakes I make along the way are never going to be catastrophic enough from derailing me, delay it from derailing me enough to never, to make the end goal unreachable. And then ultimately, we're talking about money here. Look, we're talking about business, and that's what I guess that that's people's fear is losing money, either not making enough or losing it along the way. And I've never really feared losing it because I know I can always make it back again tomorrow. I've never had an earning problem. I've just had a spending problem. And I can you can drop me in the middle of a new town, a desert island, wherever, and I'm going to be pretty confident to back myself to be getting paid again in no time. I don't mean I'm going to be making $1 million tomorrow, but I'm confident enough to be put anywhere and know that I've got the skill set and the work ethic to get paid. And I'd like to think it never comes to it, but I always say that I'll clean a toilet or suck a dick if that's what I've got to do. I,
If you could,
I,
hey, if you could do both at the same time,
well,
you'd get overtime.
listen,
You'd get double pay.
hopefully I don't have to do either of them in a hurry. But ultimately, if that's what I got to do, that's what I got to do.
I bet
Uh,
you've never been on a podcast where you got to say that before. Maybe you have. I don't know. I told you it's a different kind. Let me scoot on with your biography. Um, You've invested in over 100 companies despite being declared bankrupt during the financial crisis of 2008. And I remember that one. Matt rebounded and rebuilt, now using his expertise to help other businesses and entrepreneurs thrive, cementing his reputation as one of the UK's most resilient and innovative leaders. You sure as fuck are. In addition to his business ventures, Matt hosts two podcasts, Stripping Off with Matt Haycox. All right. I love the title. It's very controversial, but what is that one about? Stripping off.
so I've got two podcasts, and to be honest, they both the names of both of them now have changed from what they started off as. So originally, the background to that is I had a podcast called The Matt Haycox Show. And it started 6 or 7 years ago. And really, at the time, there was no logic. There was no, let's say, thought out logic of why I did it. I just wanted to create some content, and it was maybe easier to do a podcast talking to guests, and I guess putting the onus on them to do the hard work
Right.
than having all the cameras shining on me. So I kind of accidentally fell into creating a podcast. Started to see the benefits of it. I enjoyed meeting the guests. I enjoyed learning from them. It was great for networking. It was great for credibility. But I used to have like a lot of celebrity guests where it'd be deep dives into their career, into their life, and picking out key moments along the way. But then I'd also do some good content with non-celebrity guests, so I'd do some interesting bits on my own. And the problem was none of it really there was no congruency between it all. And I'd create a viewer because they were interested in my celebrity deep dives, and then a week later I might be interviewing a very tactical salesperson, but it's just not what they wanted. Or I
Right.
might be talking my own business advice, which again is not what they wanted. So I split the two off, and we had the Matt Haycox Show, and we had Matt Haycox Daily. And Matt Haycox Daily was we did a podcast nearly every day. We were doing about 4 a week, 5 a week, and they were all business orientated. And the Matt Haycox Show was all celebrity guests and their deep dives. But then they both ended up getting a rebrand because the Matt Haycox Show kind of didn't really say anything. It's
Yes.
what does it mean? So we called it Stripping Off with Matt Haycox because I guess there's a bit of a play on there's a bit of a play on the words for the fact that we're stripping the guest off to get underneath their skin
I love that.
to dig things that other people haven't dug. But I'm also, reasonably well known for getting my arse out in places I probably shouldn't. So it was a bit of
Whoa, 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 whoa. Pause, 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 pause. I told you you can't go past interesting points. We had a pre-talk. What the hell does
a
that mean?
No, I just seem to have had many naked photos in many different places. From I don't know from the front of a boat to the top of Kilimanjaro.
Did you
Um,
really
uh,
get to the top of Kilimanjaro?
yeah, I did. You got to the top of Kili and got naked at minus 16,
What?
6,800 minus.
Dude, let me bring forth my Jewish heritage and use a word. I don't know if you've heard this word. It's mashugana. Mashugana
Yeah,
means a crazy. Have you heard that word?
Yeah, I got a lot of Jewish friends, so
Okay,
yeah.
you are Gans Mashigana. You're entirely crazy. You stripped off your clothes at the top of how you're going to get hypothermia. How did you not get hypothermia? I'm
Oh,
assuming
let
it's
me,
only for a
let me tell
second.
you, it was cold. It was cold. I had to do it at great speed. I had a couple of Sherpas there holding my clothes, ready to throw them back onto. I'm actually climbing base camp of Mount Everest in a couple of weeks' time. Actually, so it's my intention to derobe up there again as well. So.
I don't know, dude. Okay, you do you. And I
But,
think
but
very.
that's where the podcast name came from. And then Matt Haycox Daily got rebranded again. Didn't really say much, but that got rebranded as No Bollocks because all of my business advice and my podcast and my content and my newsletter all sits under the No Bollocks brand now. Just because I guess it's my style of no fluff. Business advice without the bollocks, as we say.
Yeah, for those of you who are not familiar with the term bollocks, it means no bullshit,
Yeah.
no misleading, positive thinking, make you feel good stuff. You're not going to tell people the stuff that makes them feel good. You're going to give them, shoot them right between the eyes with the stuff that is going to give them the progress, not necessarily the praise. I love it. I always say, hey, stop with the praise and cut me the check. One of my mentors who said the more they praise you, the less likely they'll pay you, and the less they will when they do.
But it kind of ties in with what we were talking about earlier, that you only learn from when things go wrong. And that's not to say that people want to be beaten down, and everyone likes a little bit of praise and a pat on the back at some point. But to be told how good everything is clearly A, not true, and B, you're not going to learn something from it. Even if you're a world class athlete, or a world class something, you've still got holes in your game and think things you need to learn from. And the reality is, I'm not talking to world class people, nor am I a world class person in those things, and therefore, I'd rather hear what's going wrong so we can correct it than be fluffed about what's going right.
It's always been one of my great gifts that I was encouraged to learn and to learn from what didn't go right without blaming myself and without pointing the fingers at other people. I think that's a great thing to have, whether you model it from a parent or the permission was given to you early on when you were young, or you just acquired it from a coach, or you acquired it because you saw it was necessary to dig yourself out of a hole. And I think it's true. And this show is about you, not me. It's just sharing my own insight that matches yours. I think a lot of people will only learn when they're so far down on the dumps, they realize there's no other path but to move forward and to develop that discernment. And so that's a wonderful thing, I think, that people can model from you. No, he sits down with entrepreneurs, celebrities, industry experts, doing cover stories of John's, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so let's talk about what was the defining moment that, what was the defining moment that changed everything? You know, you went through a bankruptcy. Um, was that it, your first bankruptcy, or what changed everything for you?
You know, I, I mean, I always say that on the bankruptcy, I don't have, a kind of an exciting, let's say, motivational story. I mean, hopefully it's motivating to someone, but I never had these dark days in the bankruptcy. It wasn't like, oh, I've lost my money, I'm suicidal, like, what do I do? And I'm, sat on the couch drinking cheap beer and crying for 3 months, and then there was a wake up call. It really was never that. The bankruptcy happened. I kind of went to bed not bankrupt, woke up bankrupt. But I always say that I was never going to fix my situation by being sat at home watching Jeremy Kyle or Jerry Springer, as you guys would say.
I was
uh,
on Jerry Springer 3 times back in the, we talk about that off the air. Or if you ever have me on one of your shows, I'll tell the story
I'd love to hear about Jerry Springer, but we had a similar show, daytime TV called Jeremy Kyle. But I say, I was never going to get better. I was never going to get paid. I had an ex-wife. I had a 1-year-old daughter, and I was never born to be poor. So I had to get back on the horse and get back at it. And so at the time. I guess my advice, if you like, was just, well, being sat at home isn't going to get me paid. Yes, obviously, I didn't have the businesses anymore. Yes, I got knocked down a few rungs, and had to start from a lower level. But unless I started at that lower level, I was never going to get to a higher level. Now I analyze it, today, 20 years on, something I didn't realize at the time is people always say to me, what was it like to have lost everything? And what I've now realized is I didn't lose everything. All I lost was my money. I still had my skill set, I still had my network, I still had my mindset, and if anything else, I just improved from the day before because I now had a new set of skills, which was understanding about bankruptcy and having another level of resilience. So, listen, glass half full, glass half empty. I was 25, 26 years old when it happened. No, well, no, I was 27 when it happened. What was I going to do? Write the rest of my life off, or get back on the horse and roll the dice again?
Goddamn remarkable, if you ask me. So many people would take the pipe to uh, all right. When it comes to entrepreneurs raising capital or securing investment, what do you think are some of the big mistakes or the biggest mistake?
The biggest mistakes that people make when raising investments.
Yes.
I think not having a plan of how are they going to raise investment, and realizing that it's a full-time job. I mean, particularly raising equity as opposed to raising loans, it really, really is
Can
a
you make the
full-time.
distinction? Forgive the interruption. Some of our audience, I understand the difference, but some of our audience, I'm sure, is not familiar with the distinction. Could you unpack that for my audience, please?
So ultimately, there's two ways that a business can raise capital, and there's kind of two types of investors, if you want to call them that. And one is debt, and one is equity. If something's debt, it's a loan, just like somebody might know as a personal loan. It's borrowing X amount of money and making a repayment of that money plus interest on top over a fixed period of time, and it's all. Whilst, listen, the outcome may still be uncertain as to whether or not the loan's going to come back, the expectation is very clear. I'm giving you 500,000 and you're giving me 650,000 back, or whatever the figure is. And if it's a secured loan, it might be attached to an asset, and it's like, well, if you don't pay me that back, then I will be taking this asset off you. Therefore, I know how I'm going to get my capital back. And that's, when I say maybe easy is the wrong word, but it might not be necessarily easy to get, but it's certainly easier than equity, and it's certainly easy to understand because everybody knows where they stand. Equity is where you're effectively giving shares up in the business, giving a piece of the business, and in return for cash today. And as an investor, you are buying a piece of that business today, giving up cash in return for the promise of something in the future. And I used the word something there as opposed to, an alleged certainty as with debt, because you're buying 10% of a business, 15, 20, whatever the figure is of the business. The return you get is totally dependent on the future performance of that business. And that is where the big variables come in, because when you're making a loan, it's reasonably simple. I mean, yes, things can go wrong, but you put your 500K out, if that's the figure, and you get your 600K back. When you're taking shares in a business, so many different things can go wrong. Are they going to hit the turn? Are they going to hit the turnover projections? Are the key suppliers going to disappear on them? Is it going to be problems with the staff? So many things can go wrong.
Yeah,
That
and even down to the, forgive me for interrupting, but even to the granular level of one of the executives decides he discovers coke and prostitutes and suddenly stops doing his job properly. There's so many variables.
Indeed, indeed. So I guess, listen, raising debt is more simple. That I would not put that down as a full-time job. But raising equity is very much, having a plan in place, going on a roadshow, and finding the right people to invest. And I think, one of my biggest pieces of advice to anyone, raising the money, is to really put the work in almost before you need it, to build the network as big as possible, because because getting an equity investor is very much about finding the right person, the right person at the right time. And debt, I keep going back to debt being simple, but when you get an equity investor, you've got to get that right one. Do they like your sector? Do they like the stage of business that you're at? Do they want low risk, medium risk, high risk? There's so many different variables, and if you're going out there knocking on the occasional door, unless you get so lucky about finding that magic person on that one day who happened to be looking for what you've got to offer, you're going to be sorely disappointed. So you really need to be networking the life out of your situation, growing a black book of as many possible investors, of funds, of asset managers, of whatever's appropriate. And I think another mistake people make when it comes to raising equity is not taking a modestly good deal when it's on the table. And by that, what I mean is, I really do believe, and look, and I'm talking about SME and startup type businesses raising equity here, not your Facebooks and your big companies. That's obviously a very different game. But when you're a small business raising money, to get an offer is amazing. And I think what I tend to see is someone goes out there raising, I'm making the numbers, wants to raise $500,000, and they've offered to give 25% of the business away in return for that, for example. And they get an offer, they get a counter offer, says, I'll give you the 500,000, but I want 35% of the business, not 25% of the business. And they argue and they don't take it. And then another offer never comes. And my view is, I'm not saying sell yourself too cheap, but what I am saying is raising equity is so hard that when you do get an offer on the table, I think you need to think very, very hard about not taking it. Because ultimately, listen, if you what your plan is to sell the business, because if your plan wasn't to sell the business, then you wouldn't be raising the equity, because you've got to sell the business, otherwise how's that investor going to make a return? And in the scenario that I gave, you're talking about a difference of that extra 10%, and whatever you sell that business for 3 or 4 million, it's the difference between you getting 300, an extra 3 or 400K. To me, I don't think that's a material amount to end up not doing the deal. And ultimately, you're going to have a reasonably short horizon when you hope you're going to sell the business for, and you're going to have a round two. And when you get your round two, you're going to have track record, because you've already
Right.
raised investment and sold the business, and you're going to have more of your own capital because you've just had an exit, which means you're going to be less reliant on other people. And then you can go and play, drive a harder bargain. But first time round, I think when you get a reasonable offer from someone, don't quibble to the point of losing the deal. Take the money and get on and drive it forward.
It's a much more complex process than what you see there in England. I know they call it Dragon's Den. Here in America, they call it
Yeah,
Shark Tank. It
yeah,
seems
yeah.
so simple and blah, blah, blah. But in fact, I know that because my niece actually got a deal from one of the sharks.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, she told me it's a whole day of pitching. They edit it down to like 10 minutes. And then they do 6 months of due diligence before you get anything, before you get one of the things that's coming up for me, and it may be tangential. I'm going to sneeze in a second, but I've read a wonderful book, and if you can, excuse me, we have no edit button. There's a wonderful book called The Scout Mindset by Julia Gallon, Galen, or Galen, I don't know how she pronounces it. And she talks about how some of the biggest businesses like Amazon, Jeff Bezos, when he was raising money for the company, actually was very realistic. He said, listen, I think there's a 70% chance that this will fail. And he was very honest with his potential investors. And Elon Musk, when he was interviewed, he said, I gave Tesla 10% chance of working, and I gave SpaceX a 10% chance of working. When you look at someone who's wanting to raise equity, does that impress you when when they point out all the potential failings and where it could go wrong, where they're being that honest with you?
I mean, listen, I think it's great to know that the founder or the management team know where the flaws are. because if they don't see them, if they don't acknowledge them, then I guess they are either kidding themselves, or kidding you, or maybe they're not trying to kid you, but they just don't know, and there's gaps in their knowledge. I mean, I think also as an investor, it depends, whether or not that business has got that high rate of failure really depends on what kind of
Right.
risk appetite that you've got, and actually my risk appetite isn't there when it comes to investing in other business. That's why I like debt, because I like more security and stability, and to kind of know what's going on. But when you're a venture capitalist, you actually need the companies that you're investing in to have an almost impossible chance of succeeding. Otherwise
It's
the
going to be
return,
too small.
yeah, the returns are just not going to be there. When you're a venture capitalist and you're looking for 100x returns, 200x returns, you need to be investing in businesses that are going to change the world in some way. And for them to change the world, it has to be almost impossible. Because if it wasn't almost impossible, then they wouldn't be changing the world. Um, and that is a completely different mindset shift, for some people. I mean, if you are investing in something where there is a very, very, very high chance of it succeeding, then the returns, by definition, shouldn't be great, because everything is about risk reward ratio. When Mark Zuckerberg is making Facebook, for example, and he's doing it before social media has really been out there, and it was just a little website for Harvard alumni, or whatever
Right.
it was at the time. When he is out there saying this business one day will have, whatever the number is, 67% of the world will be a member of this website. That absolutely unthinkable, inconceivable, almost impossible situation, is what is going to make those early stage investors those absolutely astronomical returns. If it was very easy to see why everyone was going to sign up to it, like an Uber, if it might seem obvious now that we all want our taxis on our telephones, but whatever, 15 years ago, whenever Uber's coming out there,
Right.
it's just unthinkable. And you need those revolutionary characters that want to create the almost uncreatable, and you need capital coming from people who've got a totally different mindset. People who, I guess, the venture capitalists are as entrepreneurial as the entrepreneurs in their way, because that they are prepared to put that money out the door knowing that they've got a 99% chance of failure, but if it does succeed, it's bringing back 1,000x.
Fantastic. Believe it or not, we've actually not only have we come to the end of our time, we've actually gone over, because this has been a really fascinating conversation. Now, I know, Matt, my audience is going to want to stay in the conversation with you. How do they do that? Is it the best way to do it to tune into your podcasts, or give us
You,
some,
you
how,
know, you'll find me everywhere online, on the podcast, on the newsletter, on social media. I'm Matt Haycox on pretty much everything. Just Google me, jump on social media, MATT HAYCOX. You find me on the website, find me in the newsletter, drop me a DM. I'm easy to find, and I'll always reply.
and I think, ladies and gentlemen, the best way to get in touch with Matt is to be at base camp at
Exactly. Come
Everest.
to
And if you
base
want to
camp
see
in
him
2 weeks'
naked,
time.
if you want to see him naked with his naughty bits, then make sure you're at the top when he is. Stay safe. Stay with me for a brief green room conversation. And ladies and gentlemen, once again, we have brought you a guest who thinks the dots. Thank you, Matt. And we'll see you guys on the next episode of The Influencer's Edge. The Influencer's Edge is brought to you by the Rapid Sales Accelerator. If you're ready to skyrocket your sales by 30% or more in just 90 days, then you need to claim your free training right now. You'll learn 4 words that will compel your prospects to trust you like they were children within the first 3 to 5 minutes of any conversation across any platform in any medium. You'll learn how to give your prospects objection amnesia, to crush objections like, I need to talk to my spouse, or I need more time to think it over, or it's too expensive. If you'd like to claim your free training now, go to www.paulrossbook.com. Do it before your competition does it now. Thank you for tuning in to the Influencer's Edge, where you get the latest breakthroughs, cutting-edge insights, tools, and techniques so you can leapfrog over the pack in sales, influence, and persuasion. Remember to visit our website at www.theinfluencersedge.com to enjoy even more great episodes like this one. We look forward to seeing you again on the Influencer's Edge Show.